Hi, and welcome back to English Lessons with Stephanie. This is Reading Lesson 6, Losing Chris, Part 1. That means we will start this week by reading just the first half of the story, and then next week in Class 7, we'll finish with the second half. So just like other lessons though, we are going to do a guided reading. We'll read it paragraph by paragraph. You can practice reading out loud by pausing the video and then listening, and we will use the GASP method of guessing, answering questions, summarizing, and predicting. This will help improve our reading skills. So for those of you who don't remember, GASP is a method for reading fluency. We'll start by guessing. You want to guess at words before you stop and look them up, and just see how much you can understand based on what you can guess. Secondly, we'll answer questions. If you have big questions that you need to have answered before you continue reading, then we'll stop and we'll try to answer them. This could be about what words mean, what sentences mean, or grammar that you might be confused about. The S stands for summarize. So before you move on to the next paragraph, it's important that you are able to understand the main idea of the paragraph you've just read by summarizing it. Summarizing means telling the main idea. Finally, you want to predict what you'll think you will read about in the next paragraph before reading it. That will help to prepare you to understand it better. Okay, so let's begin with paragraph 1 of Losing Chris, Part 1. I met Chris in the halls of the journalism department on our first day at school. Coincidentally, we were both reading the same novel, Gifts from Friends, before moving out to California. I was instantly drawn to his warmth, lively spirit, and sense of humor, and we soon became inseparable. So this story starts by telling us how she met Chris in the halls of the journalism department. Journalism means studying reporting or studying the news industry. So the second sentence starts with the word coincidentally. This is a vocabulary word from last class, Class 5. And if you didn't read Class 5, then I'll tell you that coincidentally means two things happen at the same time without planning. So why does she use the word coincidentally here? What's the coincidence? Well, the coincidence here is they both were reading the same novel. A novel is a fictional story, and these novels were given to them by friends before they moved to California. In the last sentence, she writes, I was instantly drawn to his warmth, lively spirit, and sense of humor. So let's take a guess here. What do you think this means? If you're drawn to someone, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Does that mean you want to be around them or you don't want to be around them? So if we look at the three examples, the three descriptors that come after that, warmth, lively spirit, and sense of humor, are these good things or are these bad things? Well, warmth is the noun form of being warm. Lively spirit, you might not know what that means, but lively has the word live in it, so it's full of life. And sense of humor, you probably know what the word humor means. It's related to being funny. So warmth, lively spirit, and sense of humor are three positive things, three good things. So we can guess that if you're drawn to someone, drawn means that you want to go closer to them. You want to be near them. It's a good thing. You don't want to go far away from them. Finally, it says we soon became inseparable. And let's look at this word and think about our grammar lesson this week, which was about prefixes and suffixes. So if we can guess what inseparable means, we can look at the parts here and break this word into in, separa, and bull, right? So what does in mean? Remember, in means not. Able means able to do something. And this middle part is not a full word, it's just part of a word, but this is part of the verb separate. So what do you think inseparable means? Inseparable means you cannot separate them. You can't take them apart. So if you say that two people became inseparable, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, because of the sentence that came before that, it means that it's a good thing. They wanted to be together all the time. So this tells us that these two friends were inseparable. So if you have any more questions, and then summarize this paragraph. What is the main idea of this first paragraph? Then predict what you will read about in the next paragraph. I would say that the first paragraph just tells us how they became friends. In a lot of ways, we were complete opposites. Everywhere I went, I felt out of place and tried my best to blend into the background. Chris, on the other hand, was always the center of attention. He was tall with a loud laugh, the first in the room to ask a question or make a joke. Everywhere he went, he made himself at home, which made everyone feel comfortable with him. He'd been on his own for years and knew how to get things done. Chris helped me find my first job in San Francisco and introduced me to my first boyfriend there. Just as it seemed we were both really settling into the city, he decided it was time for him to move on. He really amazed me. He taught me not to fear change and that wherever you went, you could set up a new life for yourself and be okay. All right, so this second paragraph starts by saying that these two friends were complete opposites. So you might know what opposites mean, you might not. But let's see if we can guess what it means. So in the next sentence, it tells us that she felt out of place everywhere she went. You can guess what this means too if you don't know what it means. Out of place, that means that you're not in the right place. So if you feel out of place, it means you feel like you don't belong there. Something shouldn't be there. And she tried to blend into the background. If you feel out of place, what would this cause you to do? You would try to blend into the background. The background is what's behind you, your surroundings. And if you're trying to blend into the background, that means you want to seem just like everything around you. You don't want to be different. You want to be the same as everything around you. Then it says, Chris, on the other hand, was always the center of attention. Now let's look at this phrase, on the other hand. If you've studied English writing, you know that on the other hand is an expression that means however or in contrast. So when we use this phrase, on the other hand, we're going to say that something is completely different than what we said before. So for example, I could say, I love hot weather. My brother, on the other hand, likes cold weather. So we're going to show two examples that are totally different. Or I could say, I like to wake up early. My husband, on the other hand, what would you guess would go there? If I say, I like to wake up early. My husband, on the other hand, likes to, you would say, likes to sleep late. Chris, on the other hand, was always the center of attention. So we can see that this shows that they're totally different. Chris was always the center of attention, but she always tried to blend into the background. She always wanted to be like everyone else. And this tells us what opposites mean. Opposites means that we have two people or two things that are completely different. Next we go on, and it tells us some things about Chris. He was tall with a loud laugh, the first in the room to ask a question or make a joke. Everywhere he went, he made himself at home. And to guess what this phrase means, we'll look at the next part of the sentence, which says, which made everyone feel comfortable with him. So what would you think this means if everyone feels comfortable with you because you make yourself at home? If you make yourself at home, that means you feel at home everywhere. You feel like everywhere is your home. So you act comfortable. Oftentimes when you visit someone's house, they say, please come in and make yourself at home. And when someone tells you to make yourself at home, that means, please, you should feel comfortable here. Pretend that this is your house, that you live there. The next sentence says he'd been on his own for years. And this is another phrase, on his own, on my own, on your own. That means by yourself. So he'd been on his own for years. He knew how to get things done. And then it gives some examples of how Chris helped her. Chris helped her to find her first job, introduced her to her first boyfriend. So introduced, you can guess what this means if you don't know this already. And then finally it says, just as it seemed we were both really settling into the city, he decided it was time for him to move on. So if you settle into a place, that means you are getting comfortable there. And then when they were getting comfortable in the city, Chris decided to move on. And move on is a phrasal verb that we learned in class 4. And if you can remember what that means, it is that you move forward or you move away. So he decided to leave the city. You might have a question about what this word just is doing in this city. Just is a word that is very flexible. It can mean only, it can mean single, but here just means as soon as or when. So as soon as or when we were both settling into the city and getting comfortable, Chris decided to leave. Finally, she says, he really amazed me. He taught me not to fear change, and that wherever you went, you could set up a new life for yourself and be okay. Set up is another phrasal verb. And what do you think set up means? Look at this sentence and just try and guess. If you could put a different verb there, what verb could you use? What could you do about a new life and be okay? After you've guessed, see if you can summarize this paragraph and then predict what you will read about in the next paragraph. Even though Chris moved around a lot, we did our best to stay close. I visited him in Texas, Hawaii, and then Alaska. I congratulated him when he got engaged and cried with him when the wedding was called off. I worried about him when he got sick. After he met someone new and moved yet again, however, he began to feel farther away. We began to talk less and less frequently, and when we did talk, our conversations became unpredictable. So in this third paragraph, it starts out by saying that Chris moved around a lot, but they stayed close. Right? Even though means the same thing as but. So how did they stay close? Well, she visited him in Texas, Hawaii, and then Alaska. These are 3 states that are very far away from each other. So she made an effort to go see him in all these places. She congratulated him when he got engaged, and then cried with him when the wedding was called off. So you probably know what a wedding is, right? So congratulating someone when they got engaged, these are things that would happen before the wedding. So before you get married at a wedding, you become engaged. So getting engaged means you say you're going to marry someone. That means you're engaged. And congratulating someone means saying, awesome, I'm so happy for you. That means when you say good things about someone's good news. But why would she cry with him? What happened to the wedding that she would cry with him? It was called off. So let's guess what called off could mean. This is another phrasal verb. Why would you cry at someone's wedding? Well, actually, you could cry for a good reason or cry for a bad reason. But then she worried about him when he got sick, and then he met someone new. So if you meet someone new, that probably means that the wedding didn't happen. So called off means something didn't happen. It was canceled. And in this sentence, things start to change a little bit. We see the word however here, and that means we're going to see something different. So before this word however, we see all these ways that they're staying close, they're friends. However, now we're going to see them become less friends. He began to feel farther away. Farther means more far. And they begin to talk less frequently, right? Frequently means often, so less often. They talk less. When they did talk, their conversations became unpredictable. So again, let's think about our grammar lesson this week. Let's look at this word and see if we can understand what it means. So we can break this word into 3 parts. Unpredictable. So remember, un means not. Able means able to do something. And our middle word here is completely here, predict. So if something is unpredictable, it means you cannot predict what something will be like. Let's summarize this paragraph and predict what we're going to read about in the next paragraph. Chris had always ended up in some unbelievable situations. One roommate went crazy and was later murdered. His dog was kidnapped. He ended up in jail on the 4th of July. And the stories he told me just seemed to get weirder. He was in a car accident. He was robbed. His family wasn't speaking to him. At times, he was moody, vulnerable, and scattered. Nothing like the strong and independent Chris who could solve any problem that came his way. Still, at other times, he was the same Chris I'd always known and loved. Hilarious, thoughtful, and adventurous. All right, there's a lot in this paragraph. First of all, we've got the phrasal verb end up. Actually, this phrasal verb is here in two places. Ended up in these situations, ended up in jail. So you can probably guess what end up means. It just means to be somewhere. So we start with another word that has a prefix and suffix of un and able, unbelievable. So unbelievable, you can guess what that means. Unbelievable means you can't believe something. You're unable to believe something. So we have 3 examples of these unbelievable situations. The first one roommate went crazy and was later murdered. So murdered is something very bad. It means that someone kills someone else. So if a roommate was murdered, that means that his roommate was killed by someone else. His dog was kidnapped. So kidnapped, it looks like a good word. You've got kid, which means child, and nap means, you might think, is to sleep. But nap also means to take something. So kidnap means you steal a person. In this sentence, it's to steal a dog. So someone stole his dog, and then he ended up in jail on the 4th of July. That means he was in jail. So these are 3 examples of these unbelievable situations. And then, she says, the stories just seem to get weirder. And what can you guess weird means if you don't know? Well, if you keep reading, we see 3 more examples of how his stories got weirder. So he was in a car accident. He was robbed. Robbed means someone stole things from you. His family wasn't speaking to him. So weirder can mean worse, something bad. But because of the ER at the end, it means more. We can see that weird must be related to unbelievable. So they become, the situations start out unbelievable and they become even more weird, more unbelievable. The paragraph goes on. At times, he was moody, vulnerable, and scattered. So we have 3 adjectives here to describe how Chris is acting. Moody, we talked about in our grammar class. That means his moods start to change, his attitudes. Vulnerable, you see the able at the ending, but vulnera, this is a word that we don't really use very much in English anymore, but it means to hurt someone. So if you are hurtable, that means people can hurt you. And then, so it's kind of the opposite of strong. If you're strong, nobody can hurt you. But if you are weak, then people can hurt you. And scattered is an adjective that means you are not very focused. You're thinking about a lot of things. So nothing like the strong and independent Chris. So nothing like, this is a phrase that means, the opposite of. And he can't solve all these problems. So again, she's showing us that he is changing. Before he was strong and independent, now he has become moody, vulnerable, and scattered. And in the last sentence, she says, but at other times, he was the same Chris I had always known and loved, hilarious, thoughtful, and adventurous. And she gives us 3 more adjectives to describe Chris. Hilarious means very funny. Thoughtful, if we look at our suffix here, full of thought, that means you think about other people and you think about things a lot. And adventurous, right? So again, here we can look at our suffix, us, shows us that this is an adjective form of adventure. Adventure is an exciting event. So if you're adventurous, that means you like excitement and you like to go try new things. Okay, before we summarize this paragraph, I want to point out to you, I want to show you that this paragraph has a lot of things in 3s. We have 3 examples here, 3 examples here, 3 examples here, 3 examples here. And that's not an accident. In English writing, we typically try to give 3 examples of things that we say. That makes our writing stronger. And this is especially true if we are just giving quick examples without a lot of details. So when I tell you there are unbelievable situations, I give you 3 examples. And giving 3 examples is stronger than giving 1 example, right? And if I tell you about Chris, I don't say just Chris was funny. I say Chris was funny, tall, and handsome. It's always sets of 3. And this is very typical of English writing. Okay, here's our next paragraph. And this is actually the last paragraph of part 1. Throughout these years, his calls to me became increasingly urgent and stressful. I would spend most of our calls just trying to understand his latest crisis and reassuring him that everything would be okay. Because of the car accident, he wasn't able to work and would occasionally ask me for money, which I would send him. Then, when I would try to follow up with him to see how he was doing, it would be impossible to reach him, and during the months that passed, there would be nothing for me to do but worry. I began to dread his phone calls. Okay, so this starts with a time span throughout these years. So this tells us that this story is happening over many years, not just 1 month or 1 week. So she says his calls became increasingly, right? Increasingly, this is an adverb form of increasing, which means to become more and more. Urgent and stressful. So you probably know what stressful means. It's got the word stress in there, right? Stress is something that causes us bad feelings. So stressful would be the adjective form of something that causes bad feelings. And urgent would be related to stressful, right? We have the and here, so we know that urgent and stressful are probably related. Urgent means something that needs your attention now, so you have to pay attention to it. She said she would spend most of the calls just trying to understand his latest crisis. What do you think crisis means? It's difficult to guess here, but it's a general word that just means some really bad situation. And reassuring him that everything would be okay. And we can see reassuring. Re is our prefix here that means again. So saying something to him again and again that everything would be okay. In the next sentence, we see that Chris had a car accident and he couldn't work because of it. So he would occasionally ask for money, right? Occasionally is our adverb form of occasion. Okay, that means sometimes, right? Not often, but once in a while, sometimes. And then she would try to follow up with him to see how he was doing. So follow up is another phrasal verb. And it's got the word follow in, means to go after. So if you were to guess what follow up means, try to put a verb in there that makes sense. It would be impossible to reach him. So she couldn't reach him. Reach someone means you can't find them. So she couldn't find him. She couldn't talk to him. And then months would pass and she would just worry. There would be nothing for her to do but worry. I began to dread his phone calls. So this is the last sentence of part 1. And we have a verb here, dread, to dread. So what do you think this verb means? Let's guess. If you take out the verb dread, I began to his phone calls. What word could you put in there that would make sense? How do you think she feels about his phone calls? Or how do you think she is acting towards his phone calls? Would you say, I began to get excited about his phone calls? I began to wait for his phone calls? Or I began to avoid his phone calls? What would make sense here? What do you think would make sense here? So his phone calls, are his phone calls good lately or are they bad? Well, it says in the first sentence, his phone calls are stressful and urgent. So is that good or bad? Well, stressful is usually bad. And what else happens in these phone calls? There's a crisis. I said a crisis was a bad situation. he would ask for money, and then sometimes she couldn't reach him. So the phone calls sound like they're bad lately. So I would say you would want to put a verb in here that shows that she doesn't feel good about the phone calls. And we'll talk about this vocabulary in our next lesson, the writing lesson. This is the end of part 1. Let's think about what we've read today. So this is a little different. Ask yourself, why does she begin to dread Chris's phone calls? Or what do you think dread means, actually? Our next question here is to connect. Have you ever been in a similar situation to the narrator? And what would you do if a friend suddenly began to behave strangely? Next, reflect. This story is called Losing Chris. What do you think the title means? So why do you think the story is called Losing Chris? And then finally, let's do a big prediction. So what do you think you will read about in part 2? Maybe a good idea would be first to summarize all of part 1. What did we read about in part 1 in 2 or 3 sentences? And then predict. What do you think you will read about in part 2? That's it for today's lesson. Summarize what you've read. Go back and review any parts that you're still confused about. Look up any words in a dictionary, so answer all the questions that you can. And then definitely continue with this week's writing and speaking lessons to go over the vocabulary some more. And we will read the second part of the story in class 7. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.